And I felt like, hey, I want to cut this beautiful face up. I want to put blade to this face. That it's going to mean something. The fans should sit there and in my case, marvel in the fact that the franchise has finally been stuck like a pig.
Was there too much blood in ECW for your tastes?
It's like all things in ECW, like something like the first time Sabu broke a table, and it elicited the response that it did, obviously. All of a sudden, everybody and their brother was breaking a table in the match. Same thing with chairs. Mine, of course, was the F-bombs, and suddenly everybody's F-bombing all over the microphone. So things would take on, and that really was where Paul, I think, was lax as a booker. If I would go up to somebody and say, hey, stop breaking tables. Hey, fuck you, franchise. You worry about your own match. Paul was the only one that really could do that. Todd, even when he was still involved with the company, was less hands-on than, say, Paul was. So that was where I think Paul was a bit too lax as a booker. And, you can argue about, it was always like being in a straitjacket before in the other promotions, because they would tell you, you have this much time, you got to go home at this point. If God forbid, if Gene Anderson comes down and flips his tie, that means go home right then. The things like that, and it really limited you as from a creative point of view. So in ECW, and suddenly you're just given, okay, you're match 3 or main event, whatever. You can go an hour, you can go 10 minutes, whatever, when you think it's right. So there was a lot of leeway there that made ECW, I think, cutting edge and different, but also in the everyday minute-to-minute management of a company like that, somebody has to be the boss. And those were the types of things where ECW started showing like a bit of its Achilles heel. When you were reading, that's why I said, like, I don't back off that, because as you're reading it, I'm remembering the stuff as well. The human cockfight, I remember that specifically because if you remember my earliest promos in ECW, I would say, Webster, professional wrestling, Webster says wrestling's a sport and we're a goddamn shoot. Well, Paul came to me and said, stop saying that, back off that a little bit. And he didn't tell me why exactly at that moment. But I'm sure that's what it was, because ECW and UFC started up almost at the same time, overlapping. And so as we moved forward, we started hearing the heat they were taking. The United States Senator, which, by the way, a little soapbox on the side, not United States Senator's purview. Worry about the laws you're passing. Mm-hmm. But the TV companies and the other things, and basically ultimately the fan base will decide if they like that or not like that. But as soon as a senator as influential as John McCain stepped into that, suddenly everybody was under the microscope, especially a fledgling promotion like ECW. And UFC, the outset from that, the outcome from that was for them they adopted the gloves, couldn't do chokeholds, the referee could stop the matches. They incorporated enough rules that then the pay-per-view company said, okay, this is more in line with what we think it should be. ECW, as you can imagine, Paul Heyman was a lot more reticent to accept and adapt into some of those things. And I think as time went on, we slowly did. But like again, in my promos and things that I would, the way I would word my promos, but it was a fight that we were having from the very beginning, along with UFC, them in a much more public way, because ECW was still pretty small at the time.
When some occasionally a wrestler I'll talk to is still a bit reticent to talk about this. I don't imagine you will be, but if you want to pass, I'm always happy to. When was the first time you did the old, when you did the blade?
A tag match with the Bruise Brothers. It was me and Curtis Hughes in a cage.
Bruise Brothers. So is that Ron and Don?
Yes, Ron and Don. I can't remember if they used Bruise Brothers there or not. Ron and Don are great guys, man. Super, super guys. And boy, what a great look they had. Just two 6'10", whatever they are, monsters. That long hair. They just looked the part. And I had intentionally, first of all, I started noticing that everybody was doing this, right? Just the same as the chairs and the tables and the F-bombs. Then it meant nothing. And I felt like, hey, I want to cut this beautiful face up. I want to put blade to this face. That it's going to mean something. The fans should sit there and in my case, marvel in the fact that the franchise has finally been stuck like a pig. And in that match, I still had the long hair then, and we had set the spot up with these guys. But I would set spots up as if it comes up, not okay. At this point, we're going to do this, and I could feel and sense from the audience that they would come with it if they saw it at this point. And they both picked me up on their shoulders and battering ran me on all four sides in the post, right in the middle of the the two fence sections. Battering ram, and I had gotten the color, went down, and I stayed down with my face down on my hair over my head, flat on the mat. Finally crawled myself to my knees, and as I kneeled up, still had the hair in my face, and I flipped the hair back, and there was this pause in the audience, and then boom, pop. That is really what we're looking for. I don't want the fans the entire time mumbling in here someplace. I want there to be some down here where they're digesting it, and other places where they holy fuck and blow through the roof. And that was the first time that I did it.
I'm surprised because you work for Bill Watts. You're in the NWA and WCW, so no one ever suggested it to you in any of those promotions.
Oh yeah, in Continental, the first time I ever got color was in Continental, right, with Eddie Gilbert. I thought you meant in ECW. In Continental, we were building up to the story for Hugo, Humongous, Sid Vicious, to be my cousin, and they had him he had not shown up yet at the building, and I was in the ring wrestling a tag match. I want to say against Randy Colley, and it might have been one of the Samoans. I know Randy Colley for sure. And in the backstage area, this was at the fairgrounds, because the Boutwell Auditorium was being renovated at the time. I think it was every Monday or Tuesday night we ran there in Birmingham. Eddie came to me and said, "Okay, this is what we want to do." And I had never done it, So, but I also was not going to let somebody else cut me, because I had seen Davey Haskins let somebody cut him, and they weren't very careful in the way they did it. So Eddie told me to take a bunch of aspirin, and beforehand they had me drinking liquor in the back and running up and down the hallway in the back to make sure the aspirin was all circulating. But I didn't, in my career, for as long as my career's been, blood has been a very small part. To me, again, it had to make sense for the story. If the story it means that the franchise should have this exclamation point at the end of that storyline, then I would do it. I think in ECW, like I said earlier, with a lot of the things in ECW, it would work, and then it became like just a flood of it. And like a glut of doing that stuff. And it watered it down to the point where, like last night, we were watching through the Barely Legal, to refresh my memory on some of the stuff. And the match with Rob Van Dam and Lance Storm, Lance, great worker, right? But and being a great worker, he's not going to want to hurt the other guy. And he was giving some really weak chair shots to Rob, and you could hear the audience reacting not so kindly. Yes. So if you're going to do it. You had to do it.
Did you ever find yourself actually enjoying the experience? Because I hear a few of the guys almost get like an addiction to because it releases endorphins, doesn't it? I mean, it's bloodletting that's been going for thousands of years, and you do get that sort of like natural high from it. Do you find that, or was it something you were never comfortable with?
No, not uncomfortable with it. Early on, you're scared to death, right? Like, you're taught, like, hey, stay away from razor blades, and people use those to kill themselves and things. And especially your face, because your face is a pretty sensitive place. I remember very, very early on in my training. Oddly enough, right down a couple of miles down the road, there's a place called Poca, West Virginia, POCA, West Virginia, and there Dominic was running a show there, and he had a lot of the local guys. And I remember walking in, and on the gymnasium wall, they had the polka dots. That was their emblem.
Intimidating.
Yes. I mean, much rather be an exclamation point than a dot, right? But it's so. And I was wrestling a guy named Irish Mike McGee. Good guy. I haven't seen him in forever, and he wanted to get color. He had this. He's just probably about my age, maybe a little bit older, but he had a Dusty Rhodes forehead. I'm thinking like for a local guy. And Dominic, he went to Dominic and he said, "Hey, can I do this?" And Dominic said, fuck no, like, what's wrong with you? There's a couple hundred people out there, if that. And we're getting ready to go through the curtain for our, to have the match. And he's digging through the garbage can. What's he doing in the garbage can, right? This is back date myself, right? Where they used to have the pull tabs on the top of the can.
Oh, yeah.
And he's digging through there, and he pulls one of those out. I said, "What are you going to do with that?" He goes, when a gig with it. I said, Dominic said no. He goes, Dominic said no blades. And I was like, okay, brother, you're on your own at this point, because Dominic could get pretty hot on things. And he did. He went out and he gaffed himself with that. And he later told me, I don't know if it was that night or some other night, he said to me, before he got out of wrestling, he wanted to have a Dusty Rhodes forehead. And I thought, like, great talent, Dusty, right? But not exactly the most handsome guy in the world, you know? So like, I was always concerned about that, like having that, just that ogre look, you know?
Or like being unemployable in your later years. Because no one in like a respect, I mean, you can't be like a receptionist or like a real estate agent and say, let me just show you that with that going on.
Yeah, or you know, even like if you walk into, like, say, a C-level suite, right? I don't think many of the CEOs are going to be hiring somebody that has this, you know, this roadmap on their forehead.
Yeah, you better have a job with a hat as part of the uniform.
But I never was afraid to do it. I never was. I never got the rush, like you're saying. Although I've seen the guys that do, like Irish Mike, he was one of those guys, obviously. To me, it had to. It's the age-old thing that I preach all the time now to the kids in seminars. It has to make sense. If it's just, okay, boom, you're punched in there, you go and you do that. And by the same token, the flip side of that is, if in a match I throw your face into a post, and a steel iron post, and you're not bleeding, why aren't you bleeding? The only reason could be because you must not have really hit the post or whatever. And so, like, those coming up like I did, and I know it's been a long time. Those guys, the Bill Wattses and the Dominics and Brunos and those guys from that generation, everything had to make sense. If it didn't make sense, if you get shot in the eye, between the eyes, and a second later you're up doing backflips and running the ropes, well, then that must have been a fake bullet. You didn't really get shot. It has to make sense. And I think today, when you apply that litmus test, very, very little of what you watch makes sense.